pop conservatives have also been responsible for the precipitous decline in the art of serious, thoughtful argumentation on the political right. Instead of presenting a structured, logical, well-supported case for their ideas, pop conservatives far too often launch into hate-filled diatribes against individuals and groups whom they dislike or which disagree with them. This approach is typical of radio talk show hosts and television commentators such as Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and Bill OReilly. These individuals have been known to insult their guests, cut off opposing arguments with crude statements of "shut up," and utter statements of unapologetic bigotry against entire large groups of individuals. Consider, for instance, a statement of O'Reilly's addressed to all homosexuals. "That's my advice to all homosexuals, whether they're in the Boy Scouts or in the Army or in high school. Shut up, don't tell anybody what you do, your life will be a lot easier." Surely this is not a sophisticated argument. There are no premises, no evidence, no appeal to universal values. O'Reilly's comment here is a mixture of insult and intimidation. It has no place in serious discourse. Limbaugh, too, has frequently descended to a similar level of invective. He has referred to American soldiers who have served in Iraq but opposed the Iraq occupation as the phony soldiers, and has even boasted of his machismo, crudeness, and intolerance, saying, "We're not sexists, we're chauvinists. We're male chauvinist pigs, and we're happy to be because we think that's what men were destined to be. We think that's what women want." The increased prevalence of vitriol and ad hominem attacks in pop conservative circles can be explained by pop conservatism's shift from the earlier conservatism's universal principles to identity politics, precisely the approach that many pop conservatives accuse the left of pursuing. Pop conservatism cultivates an us versus them view of political issues, consistent with a polylogist, class warfare-based perspective of the world. By contrast, earlier conservatives and libertarians advocated a pursuit of truth view of political discourse, where, through intelligent civil discussion and argumentation, it is possible to get all people to agree on what the best courses of action are. In the pop conservative's judgment, the good guys are the Joe Sixpack, Caucasian American-born heterosexual Christians who exhibit certain attitudes toward life, participate in certain economic arrangements, and maintain a tough and manly spirit, which is often mistakenly thought to embody American or even Western civilization. And everyone else is the enemy, incapable of being persuaded by arguments, and only worthy of being dealt with via mockery, intimidation, and political repression. The invective-based approach of pop conservatives is of course incompatible with individual liberty. How can anyone even appear to honestly support free speech while cutting off opponents in discourse, heckling speakers, and comparing, as O'Reilly did, Rosie O'Donnell's expression of her views as a private individual to Joseph Goebbels' state-funded propaganda in Nazi Germany? It is my strong suspicion that pop conservatives, were they to find themselves in a state of greater political power, would begin to openly crack down on the freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment, and would censor the media, publications, the internet, and personal freedom of association. One needs only to read the rulebook of the private totalitarian tyranny pop conservatives have established over some 600 full adults at Clearwater Christian College, or CCC, to see what the same people might do if they came anywhere near governmental power. Indeed, the CCC already receives federal aid, which indicates that the pop conservatives have influenced the government to use taxpayer dollars to fund religious tyranny. How can we defeat pop conservatism? Before pop conservatism finally undermines any attempts to preserve individual freedom in the United States, it is necessary to thoroughly reject this ideology on a personal level, and to adopt operational practices contrary to pop conservatism when promoting ideas and making policy recommendations in the public sphere. First, it is essential to drop the attempt to gain supporters for freedom by abandoning those principles of freedom that are deemed too complicated for Joe Sixpacks to understand. The victory of freedom does not require Joe Sixpacks, but it does require the genuine understanding of the principles and values of liberty by every intelligent thinking person of every social, cultural, and ethnic background. The localism, particularism, and identity politics of pop conservatism must be rejected in favor of a cosmopolitan approach that emphasizes universally valid economic, political, and moral truths. True champions of freedom must be tolerant of all individuals who do not initiate force against others. Instead of labeling people as the enemy or the other, Friends of Liberty must reach out to those who have not been exposed to the principles of freedom or disagree with those principles, and attempt to persuade such individuals through genuine argumentation and without any displays of personal contempt or prejudice. Moreover, those truths must be argued for using only reason and evidence, not appeals to faith, fiat authority, or group affiliation. In particular, the religious arguments for liberty, while they may be effective in showing particular religious groups that freedom is consistent with their faith, should not be claimed to be the only valid or proper arguments. This alienates an enormous constituency of atheists, agnostics, and softly religious persons, who by the fundamental contents of their worldviews would necessarily reject the religious arguments. Pop-conservatives have done liberty a great disservice by spending much of their time attacking secular arguments for freedom instead of genuinely trying to liberalize political institutions. Most importantly, adherence to principle must always trump perceived considerations of expediency, however skillfully couched in rhetorical or populist appeal those might be. A principled approach is not an approach that is devoid of incrementalism, but it must always insist on movement in the right direction. While a principled friend of liberty might be willing to settle for a slight reduction in government power now, in hopes of achieving a greater reduction in the future, he would never advocate an increase in government powers which are antithetical to individual freedom. The pop-conservatives have been notorious for promising only to increase government power a little less than those on the left, and have often in practice increased it by a much greater extent. The pop-conservative attitude that this time is different, and free market principles somehow magically do not hold, ought to be rejected. The task of defeating pop-conservatism falls on serious libertarians and serious conservatives alike. If through the defeat of pop-conservatism, it becomes possible to establish strong internal solidarity in favor of liberty among its self-proclaimed friends, then external threats to liberty will be much easier to confront.